Good morning. We are glad you have chosen to join with us online. This morning at the Delray Christian Church, we are celebrating Memorial Day weekend. We have the ability to gather and worship because of others who have chosen to serve. This morning, I'd like to begin by sharing with you a story of a veteran. Perhaps it's not your typical story. This is First Lieutenant Alita Lutz. She was born in Michigan to German immigrants and grew up speaking both German and English, which was significant later on in the war. Alita became a staff nurse at Saginaw General Hospital, but when World War II began, she began looking for a way to contribute to the war effort, and she enlisted in the Army Air Corps in February 10th, 1942. Now, significantly, Alita Lutz's name means winged warrior, and she volunteered for duty as an evacuation nurse. She was one of the first 3 women who were certified for this program. So she was promoted to first lieutenant and became a part of the 802nd Medical Air Evacuation Squadron of the United States Army Air Force. She began her service in Africa. This unit used the C-47 cargo planes. They would fly supplies such as ammunition and food to the front lines, and then they would evacuate the wounded. Significantly, you'll notice that because they carried ammunition and other supplies, they did not carry the Red Cross insignia. Well, Alita was one of the first, or participated in the first landing in Africa, and she participated in every American ground operation that went on there and in Europe. She was in 6 separate battle campaigns over a 20-month period. She was active in evacuations in Tunisia, Italy, and France. And several times she helped evacuate the wounded under enemy fire. Alita was involved in 196 missions and flew 814 hours in the air, more than any other Army nurse. 3,500 men were evacuated under her care, and during her time in the air, not one of those were lost. None of them died under her care. She was one of the most liked members of the unit. On November 1st, 1944, Alita died when her medevac C-47 crashed in France. The medevac was transporting 15 wounded soldiers. 6 of them were wounded German POWs, 9 were American soldiers. They were flying from Lyon, France to Italy when the plane crashed in bad weather. At least that's the official explanation. Some also speculate that it may have been shot down. It was dangerous flying conditions, but as usual, Lieutenant Alita Lutz had volunteered for that flight. First Lieutenant Elena was 28 years old when she died. She was the only female on the plane. She was awarded the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters and posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. She had numerous other campaign ribbons and medals. She was the most decorated female nurse in World War II. But most significantly were the lives of the men that she influenced and saved. Her choice to serve meant that others could live. This Memorial Day, we honor the choices of the men and women whose dedication to duty persisted even to the point of giving their own lives, so that others such as ourselves can enjoy the freedoms we have today. Our lives have benefited from the choices of others, and now we make choices that will benefit the the lives of others. Today, our sermon series is entitled The Next Chapter. We have been studying how life is a journey with a series of chapters, and the decisions we make in one chapter influence all the rest of the story. And so today we're going to conclude this sermon series. It's been from the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua chronicles how God's people came out of Egypt and into the promised land and the process by which God fulfilled the promise he had made to them. And now we are at the end of the book of Joshua. We're going to see where Joshua, their leader, challenges them to continue to honor God as they move into the next chapter of God's plan. Remember that Joshua was born a slave in Egypt. He came out with the rest of the nation of Israel under the leadership of Moses. He was one of the 12 original spies that went into the land, spied out the land. He and Caleb said, "This is a good land," but the other 10 discouraged the people, and because of their rebellion, they were all forced to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. During that time, Joshua was the military leader of the army under Moses' leadership, and when Moses died, he became the leader of Israel. And we've seen how he led them across the Jordan River into the promised land to conquer the land. The land is now mostly conquered, and now Joshua is an old warrior, but he is concerned about the future of his country. And so Joshua now is calling the people together. In Joshua chapter 24, it says, Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the leaders, the elders, the judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before the Lord. Joshua is going to challenge the people to make good choices. He is an old warrior. His life is near its end. His story is nearly complete, but he is worried about what is going to happen in the future. And today is an opportunity for us to think about our own lives, the life of our nation, the lives of our families. What is going to happen? Well, whatever happened is going to be based on the choices we make. And so let's talk about choices. As we go through this sermon today, we're going to see that Joshua is going to call the people to make 4 different choices, but all of them are related. To choose to remember God's history, to choose to follow God's commands, to choose to teach their families to follow God's commands, and to choose to stand publicly. We all have choices to make, and our choices determine the outcome of our lives and affect the lives of all of those around us, especially our children and our grandchildren. Future generations will be affected by the choices we make. And so let's get into this. First thing that Joshua challenged the people was to remember what God has done for us. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your forefathers, including Terah, who was the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the river and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the river and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. And then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your fathers out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried out to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the desert for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them before you, and you took possession of the land. And so I gave you a land on which you did not toil, cities you did not build. You live in them, you eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. God had given the people of Israel lands that they did not earn, cities they did not build, land for which they did not toil. And the same is true for us. Today we live in a country, we did not clear the land, we did not build the original cities or roads, but we all enjoy today the efforts of those who have gone on before us. And today, as we think about what we will hand off to the next generation, we best honor God by choosing to follow him. We are not the first owners of this land, and we are not will not be the last, but we are part of a chain of custody, using what God has given us for his glory. And we can be thankful for God's blessings, or we, as spoiled children, might demand more. God has given us more blessings than we can count. America is so richly blessed, but there are so many in our country who act like spoiled children. They have forgotten what God has done for us. They have forgotten the spiritual heritage of our nation. They are no longer thankful to God. They think only of what they can receive. Even today, there are many who want to tear down the history of our country. When Joshua was speaking to the people about the history of Israel, he mentioned people like Terah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You know, these were not perfect people. The Bible does not shy away from telling us their faults. There are many dark stories in the history of Israel recorded in the Old Testament. But God was not afraid to tell his people the truth about the different people that he used. And God is not afraid even for us to know the truth about the people in the Bible. Those sins, those dark spots, they're not hidden from us. God has put them there to teach us lessons. And God is not afraid that we would teach the truth about our own country, that there is some dark history in our country. But all of that has brought us to this point. How are we going to go into the future? And so Joshua recounted the history of the people of Israel. Any nation that forgets its history will feel like it has no roots. And any family that does not remember its history will be like a plant with no roots. This Memorial Day weekend, if you gather with your families, that is a great time to tell your children and grandchildren some of the stories of your family. Let them know your family history. Secondly, Joshua called the people to make a choice to follow God's commands. Joshua 24:14, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods that your forefathers worshiped beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Throw away the gods that your fathers served. If there were still idols in the tents, Joshua said, throw them away, get rid of them. There may be things in our own lives that we need to throw away. Joshua said, don't give the idols to someone else, don't sell them, throw them away. And there are some things that we may need to throw away, that there may be some garbage in our lives that needs to go. It might be expensive garbage. It might be garbage that's worth a lot of money, but if it distracts us from following God, divides our loyalty, it should go. We need to throw away the idols of our lives, even if it costs us. In Acts chapter 19, there's a story about how the Apostle Paul was preaching, and many who had practiced witchcraft and magic arts had come to the Lord. And it says, many of those who believed now came and openly confessed what they had done. A number who had practiced sorcery brought their scrolls together and burned them publicly. And when they calculated the value of the scrolls, the total came to 50,000 drachmas. In this way, the word of the Lord spread widely and grew in power. Now, a drachma was a day's wage. In today's money, the value of the scrolls they burned would be over $1 million. It was not a cheap sacrifice for them to throw away those things that represented their old life, but they knew they had to clean house. They knew they had to make a choice. And Joshua reminds the people of Israel of their need to make good choices. We would have thought, after they had seen all the miracles and wonders done in Egypt, that they would have been absolutely loyal to God. But as soon as they crossed the Red Sea, when Moses went up on the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments and the rest of the law, the people fell into idol worship and they worshiped a golden calf. I wonder, what idols seduce America? What are the golden trinkets that distract us today? We might think of them in terms of money, power, affection, attention, addictions, leisure, security, but those are all just different ways of saying that we are worshiping ourselves, that we have placed our own desires ahead of God's will. We elevate ourselves to the God of our own lives. That was the original sin, substituting human will for God's will. So the choice for us today is very clear. Are we going to worship ourselves, or are we going to worship God? And that has implications for our family. Joshua was teaching his people, teach your children to follow God. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers worshiped beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are now living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Joshua was looking to the future. What happens after I die? What happens after the generation dies? Will others follow? Right after the book of Joshua comes the book of Judges. And on Sunday evenings now, we're going to get into the book of Judges. But I'm going to tell you, just as a heads up, it's not a very pretty picture. It's the picture of a forgetfulness of people who turn away from God, just like in America we have forgotten and turned away from God. And one of the reoccurring problems that we will see throughout the book of Judges is that the one generation does not teach the next generation to follow God. The only way children are going to learn the history of America is if someone teaches it to them. Only if they are taught to honor those who have gone before. And the only way the children of our church will continue to honor and love God is if they are taught. Not only do we need to choose to follow God ourselves, but we have to choose if we're going to teach our children. Joshua said, as for me and my household, Joshua set the example. He didn't just tell others, he led his own family. He taught his own family. He taught them to follow God's word. And in so doing, Joshua chose to stand publicly. He stood before the people and said, as for me and my house, we will serve God. People want to know where we stand. People want to know what is the basis of our lives. Today in our world, so many people are just afraid of offending others. The worst offense in our culture is to have any opinion or any belief that does not conform with everyone else. But Joshua was not concerned about political correctness. He was concerned about honoring God. And we have come to a point in the history of our nation where we have to make a choice. We can be politically correct or we can be biblically correct, but we cannot be both. And let me say that again. We can be politically correct or we can be biblically correct, but we cannot be both. You have to make your choice. The people responded, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord and serve other gods. For it was the Lord our God himself who brought us out and our fathers up out of Egypt from the land of slavery, and performed these great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through we traveled. And it was the Lord who drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God." Because he is our God. We serve him because he is our God. The people of Israel embraced Jehovah as their own personal God. Not just the God of Moses, not just the God of Joshua, our God. And we have to decide if God is our God, not just the God of our forefathers, not just the God of others, but our God. You see, God is not your God because he was the God of your parents or the God of your grandparents. He is only your God when you make the choice to accept him and embrace his life. Are you too embarrassed to take a stand for God? Does it seem too awkward that you would be baptized in water in front of other people? I love this picture of this marine baptism at Iwo Jima back in 1945, surrounded by broken tanks and the scars of war. These two men are in the ocean. And it shows us that whether you are black or white, whatever your nationality, God welcomes anyone who is willing to take a stand for him. Jesus Christ was not ashamed to be crucified on a cross in front of everyone that day. People came by and mocked him and laughed at him, but he was not ashamed to be crucified on that cross for your sake. And you should not be ashamed to be baptized in front of everyone for his sake. Choices are important. Joshua called the people to choose to remember God's history, to choose to follow God's commands, to teach their families, and to stand publicly. Today we enjoy bountiful blessings which God has poured out on our nation, in part because of the good choices that previous generations have made. We live in a culture that has rich history and bountiful wealth. We live in a rich land that God has created. We did not create this land. We didn't cause the flowers to grow or the trees to grow. God has created this land. He has protected us. He has guided us through wars. We live in a land with great science and technology as a result of God-given ability to think and communicate. But will we as a country continue to remember and honor God for his provision? And will we remember to honor those men and women whose lives have preserved that freedom for us today? And the answer lies in the choices that you and I make every day. It's time for us to think about our relationship with God. Think about God's faithfulness to you. God has led you. He's given you opportunity to follow and serve him. There are times when you feel like you've been very close, but perhaps there are times you feel like you've drifted away. So where are you in your relationship with God right now? Just think about this. Your ability to worship freely today was provided by the men and women who died in battle, whose lives and death we honor this Memorial Day weekend. But beyond that, your ability to choose to follow Jesus and have your sins forgiven and to be a part of eternity as part of God's family, that choice was provided by Christ's death on the cross. Today, we have choices because they made choices. And so what are you going to do today to honor God with the choices and the freedom and the opportunity that you have today?